Good evening and welcome. Tonight's event is the third and final event in our Spring 2019 Latino Latin American Studies program series on the theme of Politics of the Imagination, Historical Remembering. We hope you'll join us again in the fall semester. We haven't determined the precise theme, but we're going to be focusing on social movements in the Americas. For those of you who might be interested in the Latino Latin American Studies learning community, LLAS 270, I know several of you are here today doing the spring semester version. In the fall semester, we're going to be producing a mural. Right? So if you're interested in mural making, whether or not you're an actual artist, you're more than welcome. It's a collaborative effort. We've completed 3 murals so far in the last 2 years. This will be our 4th. Back to this semester, the theme of this semester's series centers on the concept of historical memory. How we imagine the past guides in complex ways how we engage with the present. This is because historical memory, which we can define as the stories about the historical past that communities create and circulate and identify with, shapes the ways that we perceive ourselves and others. Historical memory is a site of agency, of power, but also of potential disempowerment. Forgetting leaves some among us without a place in the collective story. Selective remembering can elevate some among us while diminishing others, while injustices officially forgotten continue to haunt the social body. How and who and what we remember is entangled in relations of power. Tonight's speaker, Javier Tavera, moved to the United States from Mexico City. He focuses his photographic work on sharing the lives of the marginalized. His images offer insight into the diversity of numerous communities and give voice to those who are often invisible. Tavera has exhibited his work extensively in the Twin Cities, nationally and internationally, including in Germany, Scotland, Mexico, Chile, Uruguay, and China. His work has been integrated to the collections of the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Plains Art Museum, the Minnesota Museum of American Art, the Minnesota History Center, and the Weizmann Art Museum. His presentation this evening is on collective memory and borders. Please join me in a warm welcome for Javier Tavera.
Good evening. Let's see if technology cooperates with me. Anybody has been put in this position is always like, technology is always an issue. But let me tell you first who I am and how I got to the body of work that I'm currently doing. For that, I need to go a little bit back. I'm going to show you only 2 bodies of work that I'm very, very passionate about and has to be with the theme. I'm being clumsy because I restructure everything around, right? I have my little cassette player and I just run it, but now I have to, it's segmented. Just a little bit of my background. As Bruce was saying, I immigrated to the United States in 1996. And back then in Mexico, I was photographing something completely different than I'm doing right now. And the reason for that is that in Mexico, I'm not Mexican. In Mexico, I'm Javier, sometimes Javier Tavera. But in Mexico, right, I don't question my identity as a Mexican or a Latino. As soon as I immigrated to the United States, I have all these titles, right? I am a person of color, I'm an immigrant, I'm a Mexican, I'm all this stuff that I have to grasp with and that I have to think and make sense of all of this. So immediately what I did is turn my camera to the Latino community in the United States. And then with that also photographing and trying to shed some light into sections of the community that I think need some attention. One of them, one of the projects that I'm going to show you started about 5 years ago. I always tell, I teach at the University of Minnesota, so I always tell my students that it's very unfair because of the structure of academics that I force them to be creative. You have 2 weeks and you have to turn in some very cool stuff, right? Start now. For us that we are in the career in the arts, we take a little longer to digest, to do more research, and to try different things. For this project, I actually started this going back to Mexico. I went with the help of a journalist friend. I got into the military community to photograph the few Latino veterans that are alive from World War II. Mexico sent close to 300 guys to World War II, as opposed to the United States, that the United States sent close to 2 million people. Mexico only sent a small squadron. So the way I operated is I will make a bunch of calls, I will try to make appointments, and then I will fly to Mexico City, get a car, and drive around looking for them, interviewing them. I was photographing them, and again, I'm a photographer, I'm not a journalist, so I was doing these interviews clumsily, writing down all the stories, and later on I will see the interviews and they wouldn't make any sense. Later on, I modify the way that I do the interviews, and right now I'm taping them so I can get their own voices. I'll photograph them in their homes. I'll photograph the items and artifacts that they brought back, and we'll have these great, beautiful conversations. Let me clarify that I have nothing to do with the military. I don't have a military background, and neither my family. Actually, my father is left-wing student organizer, and I got a lot of information from him. So even when I was gonna wear something that was green, he will tell me like, you know, that looks a little militarized. So, I mean, use something blue or gray or whatnot. So I'm coming to this project with that background. And it's beautiful when I come to a project and all my expectations, all my background, all my preconceptions of people get shattered. I was funding this myself, so it was getting a little bit expensive, going there, spending 10 days, coming back, trying to get more money to keep on photographing. And I thought, well, I live in Minnesota now, maybe I can find something that is similar that I can photograph here without going into too much expense and having the time to connect with people and photograph them. So I found in the West Side in St. Paul, post number 5. Post number 5 is composed, is a post that is composed with about 97, 98% Latino, Chicano, Mexican, Mexican-American veterans. It was not easy to get in. It was a little tricky. I didn't know where they met. I didn't have any contact. So little by little, I learned from friends, from people in the community, who they were and where they were gathering. I learned that they were gathering in the west side in St. Paul in a place called the Neighborhood House. And I thought this was going to be easy. I go there, meet them, and that's it. Neighborhood House didn't want it, to give me that information because it's private information. They didn't have any phones of the veterans because those are private phones. So I was having a little hard time getting to know them. One day I call the main office and I say, well, this is what I need. I left my information. Nobody has replied back. What can I do? And they were saying, well, this is why you have to just catch him. And I say, okay, just tell me yes or no. When are they meeting? And there's a long pause in the phone. And she said, Thursday. What time? 6. And she hung up. And I went, knocked on the door that Thursday, opened the door, and there's 20 veterans around the table. And they're looking at me like, what do you want? What is that you're doing here? And I introduced myself and I introduced the project. This is what I want to do, and this is what I'm here for. And they gave me one phone number, actually of Manny. Manny, unfortunately, died about 3 years ago. He passed away. And he gave me about 4 hours of stories, of conversation, of me writing stuff, of he posing for the camera, and that was wonderful. Later on, they gave me another phone number and another phone number until I got to the commander. And the commander, this is his father, Mr. Medina. I wanted to photograph them both. His son is a Vietnam veteran, Mr. Medina, World War II veteran. And I went to their home, and after a long pleading with them for access, and after they went through the experience of the interview and the photographic experience, next day I had a roster of a ton of different names and numbers. And from there I just took off photographing them. Right in the middle of the project, I thought, I am interested in this subject, and I'm interested in hearing them. I'm interested in their stories. But who else is going to be interested in this stuff? So I thought, maybe I should do this more publicly. So I asked money to the State Arts Board, to the Minnesota State Arts Board, and they granted me some money so I can enlarge, print, and I gifted all this material to the Historical Society. Later on, they have the idea to make an exhibition. And their stories are wonderful. Mr. Martinez is a World War II veteran, and 20 minutes in the interview, he was ranting about this hyper-masculinity thing about how he shot Germans, and that's why all they did is shot Germans and killed Germans. And, you know, I can see it in his body, how he was ramped up and real excited about it. And I just let him tell his story. At the end of the 20 minutes, I say, Mr. Martinez, can you tell me what happened when you came back? What happened that day that you came back to St. Paul? So he started telling the story, and his body changed, his demeanor changed, and he started telling me, Javier, have you seen those movies when the boys come back from war, and everybody's waiting at the depot, and there's a band, a marching band, and confetti, and the families are there to receive them and all that? And I said, yeah, I mean, I've seen those movies, and actually with the current and more current wars, we've seen that when they get into the airport and they're greeted by their families and whatnot. And he said, yeah. He said, well, none of that shit happened to me. When I arrived to the St. Paul depot, nobody was there to receive me, and I just dragged my stuff 2 miles to my mother's home, and I knocked on the door, and she was surprised to see me. She opened the door, and the first thing that she said, what are you doing here? And he asked her, nobody told you that I was coming back? And apparently nobody told her that his son was coming back from war. A week after he came back, he was already in his old job at the railroad working. So those are the kinds of stories that I wanted to hear. Mr. Obregón fought in the Korean War, and he tattooed his chest. He was, I think, 19 years old, and he tattooed his chest on the way there in a ship that took a month to get to Korea. And he did this with shoe polish and a needle. And of course the thing got infected, and he started to get temperature, and then his superiors find out, and he was scolded. And they told him, like, what the hell are you talking about, right? You are going to war and you're playing this stuff. When Mr. Obregón came back from war, he went to St. Paul to have lunch with his buddies. And he asked for the bathroom. And they told him, oh, yeah, it's outside and around where the non-white go. And he was appalled, and he was very angry, because he went and he was saying, he was yelling, I gave my life for this country, right? And I come back and nothing has changed. Mr. Menchaca, Vietnam. Mr. Capas. Mr. Capas is a very interesting fellow. He went to World War II, and then when the Korean War came, he went to Korea. And then when the Vietnam War was going on, he went to Vietnam too. So he's very well respected in the community and amongst the armed forces. I was so lucky when he arrived in a wheelchair to the opening of the exhibition. And just to see that he was there, and the enormous respect that people have for him was quite outstanding. This is his brother, Al Capas, and he also passed away about 3 years ago. And I didn't know about his departure. I knew when his great-granddaughter emailed me saying, Mr. Al has passed. Do you have any pictures or anything that you have collected? We found your business card among his stuff, and we were thinking if you have anything for me. Like, yeah, absolutely. So right away, I emailed her 3 photos, and I also emailed her the whole interview, raw interview that we made. And I didn't hear from her for 2 weeks. And I was like, well, I don't know how this went. I don't know if she received them or not. 2 weeks later, she wrote me back saying that she played the recording to her mom, Mr. Capis's daughter, and they just cried for 2 hours because they were hearing him in this very proud demeanor, or how he was proud to be Mexican American. He was proud to be in the armed forces. He was proud to be American. And then I said, well, this is what is it about. It's not about me having a photo and printing it and having it in the wall, right? This is what photography is about. It's about connecting with people and doing something about it. Mr. Vasquez, Vietnam veteran, his colleagues call him a full-time veteran because he's always in camouflage and all that stuff. One day, a Sunday, with the Cinco de Mayo celebration being less than a mile from his home, he decided to join the parade. So he got put all his gear, but he got also a plastic fake semi-automatic weapon in his shoulder, and he started to walk down the street. It took him two blocks, and he was surrounded by police, and he was on the floor, and they were yelling, "What in the world are you doing? This, don't do this," right? So I asked him to, so I wanted to photograph him with a gun, of course. And he said, well, yeah, he was very sketchy about it. We ended up going to the back of his house, and he was looking all the time, right? Because he got a bad experience. Now I'm going to show you a work that I'm very, very passionate about, a work that I've been doing for 3 years. About 3 years ago, I was writing my thesis for my MFA, Master in Fine Arts. And at the same time, this new government administration was taking over. The work that I was doing before was very poignant about the Latino community in the United States. And the last semester of my master's, I thought, I'm not sure if I could be doing this work at this time. So I decided to, in 6 months, go several times to the border, U.S.-Mexico, and document what is now an extremely politicized area of the country. I went also to the ecology building at the University of Minnesota, and I asked to photograph a couple of their specimens. The bald eagle that we have poured into this animal, all this symbology, but also the golden one that is on the Mexican flag. And I was playing with these images. If I present them like this, one on top of the other, they resemble a symbol. If I display them flat, it becomes a different thing. It becomes a specimen. At the same time, I was photographing a group of Latino migrants. And I decided to source imagery from different places. If you remember, the icon of Justice, actually Lady Justice, is a female figure that has Her eyes are bandaged. She has in one hand a balance, and in the other one she has a sword. So I decided to ask several migrants to do this. But I'm also grabbing from Mexican popular culture. The only situation that you're going to see somebody dressed like this in this fashion is when people are about to participate in the breaking of a piñata. So I'm grabbing from here and I'm grabbing from there and I'm putting it together to make a point. This is one of the first photos that I did on my trip, on one of my several trips to the border. I was, the project has evolved in different ways, but at the beginning of the project, I thought I really wanted to photograph landscape. I will photograph a wall where there's a wall, a fence where there's a fence, a river where there's a river. And I photographed this gentleman in this fashion because it resembled topography. Topography mixed with geography, mixed with family tree, right? You can see his father and mother and daughter and son with his last name and other inscriptions. This image is taken from the U.S. side, from the San Diego side. This is where the fence wall goes into the ocean. So I started my trip there. Every time that I can, I cross to Mexico. So I keep crossing back and forward to have a better idea of what the notion of the border is. So before I go any further, also one of the ideas behind this is that any Latino, regardless of where they were born, if they were born in Mexico, Central South America, or they were born here, we are deeply marked by the concept of the border. The border is not something that is way, way south. That same notion replicates in almost every town and city in the United States. If you go to the west side, to the east side in St. Paul, if you go to Lake Street in Minneapolis, you will find those same cultural clashes. I'm also doing the analogy north and south. So I start my trip. This is also in Tijuana. I am looking at, in the other side, you can see the prototypes of the border wall that Trump commissioned. It was super interesting because I couldn't get to the prototypes from the US side. There's a 2-mile radius that you cannot get near there. But I went to Tijuana and there they are, a few feet from the fence. So I put a couple of tires and a bucket, and I stood, and you can see the whole thing is there. It's kind of funny. Now they're gone. They took them, they disappeared them. This is again in the San Diego side. You can see 1, 2, and over there 3 border vehicles. Surveillance. And of course, I was making this journey thinking about the landscape, but most of my work is portraiture. So every time that I see something or somebody that is interesting, I engage into a conversation and I ask them to be photographed. and absurd things like this. Surveillance, markers, there are 234 markers, historical markers that mark where the border is, where the border should be. So every time that I found one, I go and photograph that. Also cultural markers. And landscape. Landscape is something that I haven't done, that I actually looked down on landscape. So it was a challenge for me. But in my research, I found out that the landscape in the US started in a very interesting way. So when the British troops will come here, they will usually bring an artist. And the artist, as soon as he will step on American land, he will start drawing, painting, printmaking the American landscape. And they did this not to see the exotic land or the beautiful light or the extension of this land. They did this as a document. So they can go back to Europe and say, gentlemen, this what you see here, now it belongs to us. But not only that, this thing is for sale. So you can come and occupy that. So the landscape in the United States, it has a clear base of colonialism, not of essentially art. So I will photograph the landscape during the day. I will photograph it during the night. I will photograph it where also private property that a rancher decided to put some facilities there, porta potty, water, and whatnot. I will photograph the top of the line surveillance artifacts that the Border Patrol uses to track migrants, and also these archaic artifacts that they use to track migrants. This I found by the thousands along the border. How they are used, the border truck will hook the tires to their truck and drag these tires to the side of the highway to even out the terrain, so they can, when a migrant crosses, they can see exactly where they cross, how many, in what direction. And again, more landscape. And then I wanted to do something else with the landscape, not just photograph the landscape as it is. So I started to propose things. In this case, I proposed, instead of building a wall, let's build a tunnel. Or how about if we build an elongated table instead of a wall that goes for miles and miles? What would we do if we encounter a table instead of a wall, right? Will we approach it? Will we jump it? Will we have shelter underneath? Will we have a conversation with somebody in the other side? Would we have a meal with somebody that is in the other side? How about a shelter? I was imagining what would be the conversations that will take place under a shelter in the middle of the desert. The crazy thing is that on my third trip, I actually found one. This is not a shelter for migrants. This is actually a shelter for the Border Patrol. You can see the truck right there. And whenever I find people, I approach and I engage in conversation. That's the best source of information that I can rely on. And people that have the notion of something being normal. You can see this gentleman is about to fly a kite, and in the back you see the river, you see Border Patrol, and way in the back you see the fence. I'm in Juarez, and the other side is El Paso. And also, cultural things that happen in both sides. And more landscape. So whenever I talk about this project, whenever I get to this point in the talk, I do a little game. So let's see if it works. Again, yes, I'm trying to trick you, but it's not my intent to trick you. So one side is Mexico and one side is the United States. Which one do you think is which? If you can yell that out, that'd be great. There's no right or wrong answer. Left, right. Which one is the United States? Left? Right? Okay, let's go a little more complicated. What about there? Which one is which? Because the river serpents around and keeps on going around. Okay, one binary one. One side is the United States and the other one is Mexico. The left is what? The left actually is the United States and this is Mexico. So my point here is not, hey, I got you, right? So we can try to see that topography doesn't acknowledge borders. This is a man-made concept. This is a complete man-made concept. And again, I'm talking about north and south and photographing more landscape. There's a barrier there for cars not to cross. I keep on photographing people right at the border, people that live in the two sides. This is a couple that I found that he lives in the Mexican side, she lives in the US side. And they say, well, 5 years ago, this was not here. 5 years ago, we just can cross, have lunch in the other side, and come. They have properties in the both sides. Both of them know English and Spanish. Both of them are dual citizens. In order for them to meet without the obstacle of the barrier, they have to go half hour to the crossing point and half hour back. So this is the way that they meet daily. And crazy, strange stuff in the middle of Arizona that doesn't make much sense. I'm not sure what that is deterring people, right? And just last November, I stumbled across this thing, and I thought it was super funny because it's right, the eyes, right? Yeah, you get it. I don't have to explain it anymore. I photographed during the night. And I also find stuff that is super interesting. And just yesterday that I was talking to a class, yeah, exactly, right? I found language but this is it went even further because the symbol belongs to the WuTang Clan. For anybody that knows a little bit about hip hop rap, this group is actually from New York. and they're using the symbology, but they're putting the letters in a certain way. So it's this mixture of ownership of the term and ownership of hip is like, I'm still trying to grasp with that. It's kind of mind-blowing how cultures and right start to do this hybrid crazy thing. Photographing during night, and it's funny because I travel with a big strobe, so I'm with my camera and my big strobe in the middle of the desert, and I'm just flashing. I met Joe. I have breakfast with Joe. He's from Arizona. He knows all the region pretty well. And I'm finding also very disturbing things. This is very close to Douglas, Arizona. And if you notice, the structure doesn't have a roof. So if for any reason you're put in there during the summer, it's 110 degrees, you'll fry. If you're there at night during the winter, it's 20, 25 degrees because it's the desert. And actually I found 4 of them. The first one, I didn't even get out of the car. The second one, I got out of the car, I touched the thing, I went around, I photographed it. The third and the fourth one, there's nothing else more that I can say. There's nothing else more that I can photograph. And more of the tires and artifacts. And more people. And this is one of the last ones of my journey, where I photograph in the other side of the continent, in Brownsville, Matamoros, where the river pours into the Gulf of Mexico. And people are there, both, the US side, that's the Mexican side, and in both sides, people are fishing. And sometimes if you see a fisherman in the other side, a few minutes later, you see him in this side. And everybody's chasing the fish. They're not crossing because any other reason, just to fish. I'm finding also, this is in Nogales, in the Mexican side. I'm finding interesting characters. This one is in Marathon, Texas. This family is also in Marathon, Texas. I went 2 weeks ago in spring break to a little bit more of documentation. And this time I found also, and I was able to photograph and deported veterans. They were nice enough to receive me in Juarez, and I photographed and interviewed 5 of them. Don Panchito emigrated to the United States when he was 12. And right away he got working super hard. When he was about 19 or 20, a letter came to his house asking him to show himself at the military recruitment station. So he went there and he's like, well, this letter came, but I don't speak any English. And they say, not a problem. that shouldn't be a problem. This is what we're going to do. We're going to send you to Vietnam, and then your citizenship and all that stuff is going to be completely taken care of. So he's 1 year in training. Second year, he gets deployed to Vietnam. And in Vietnam, as many other veterans, he starts smoking. And when he comes back, he keeps smoking. He has PTSD. So somebody told him, like, with a little bit of dope, you can, right, ease your pain. That escalates, and he starts using cocaine. And he gets a tip from a friend saying, well, in such and such a hotel, they're selling very, very cheap cocaine. You should go and get some. So he goes there with the intent of buying a gram or two, and it's a sting operation, and he gets caught. He gets incarcerated for 2 years, and immediately he gets deported. He's been deported for 20-something years. And there's very little chance of him coming back. And I was telling him, well, why would you want to come back? You have family now in Mexico. You have your life made. You've been here for so long. And he says, I'm 72. I don't want to go back to work. I just want to go back to visit my mother's grave, because she passed away when I was deported, and I haven't able to visit. Incredible stories about a little mistake will your whole situation is gonna change. So I did that a couple of weeks ago, but I also interviewed the families of descendants of Texas massacre. These families, Mrs. Valencia is the great-granddaughter of a gentleman who was executed amongst 15 boys and men in a little tiny town close to the border in the Texas side called Porvenir. That's kind of ironic, right? That is called Porvenir. And the Texas Rangers rounded up these people and shot them to death. Back then, the Texas Rangers were composed of ranchers and outlaws and anybody who wanted to join the Texas Rangers. Because of this massacre, the Texas Rangers was forced to reorganize, and it is what it is now. But it's very interesting. About 10 years ago, they started to learn who their grandfathers, grandmothers were. Incredible stories of Let me see if I can get rid of that. We're almost to the end. Doesn't want to escape. Well, these were the two last ones. The erasure of history and of people is incredible. they fought and they pleaded and they finally got a historical marker. But the Texas Commission, the Texas Historical Commission, was reluctant to put the marker on. Finally, last year, in January, was it last year or this year? I think it was this year because the thing is brand new. They were able to put, it's a little plaque to the side of the highway. The Texas Commission was saying that's something that is political. And we don't want you to have it here, right? That sense of history and also anonymity in all the borderland is something that is very, very, very heavy. So my point is to get some of these stories and try to distribute the information. So prevent or try to deter from this part of history and these stories to just shed and leave. So it's 52 minutes. I'm not sure what time it is, but what we can do is open it real quick for questions. So before we open it for questions, I want to make this a safe place that whatever you want to ask is going to be well received, right? If you want to talk about photography, if you want to talk about technical stuff, if you want to talk about race, if you want to talk about identity, any question is welcome, right? So universities are supposed to be a safe place for us to ask and discuss things. Yo guys, Professor here is watching. Who's going to ask the question?
Was it hard for you to hear all of these sad stories from the people, or did you just take it all in and not show any emotion? Or how was it for you?
So, I'm a photographer. I'm an artist. I'm not impartial, as you can see, right? So when people are sitting down with me, either veterans or migrants or deported veterans are talking to me, it's impossible to be just like poker face and say yeah, tell me more, right? No, it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to what these people are going through. The five deported veterans that I talked to, I said, okay, you have gone through 3 major traumatic events in your life. One of them is war, the other one is prison, and the third one is deportation, right? Which one has been the worst? The 5 of them separated, right? I individually interviewed them. Without a doubt, deportation is the most traumatic thing. Like, really? Not the 5 years that you spent in prison? No, that was not a problem. Deportation, the shame, the being in another country, the trying to make sense out of it, being separated from your family is horrible. So it's hard to get detached from that. I really feel how things are for these people. It's really, really, right? Usually I go home and it's 8 at night and it's like good night. I'm exhausted and it's very emotional. It's very tiring. But I think I have to do it because I also want people to hear and I want people to learn what's happening. I think that's important so I just keep on going and getting and communicating with people and seeing humanity in the people that I'm for. Yes.
So in terms of collective memory, between interviewing like those who are younger and then the veterans of like World War II who are older, how have you seen collective memory kind of like change and evolve between the different generations?
It's super hard. It's super hard because they know who they are, but the Latino community, the new arrivals, right? The dominant community, the dominant culture doesn't know about them. So, and many of these stories, right? So how do you build that collective memory? Or, in the other side, how does that collective memory, it tends to be fractured? And enormous labor in erasing that. And one of the main aspects of it is the anonymity. One thing is the collective memory, where we all, right, recur to this event. But the other one is when you hear about migrant caravan, right? Crazy shit. Nobody has a name. Nobody has a last name, right? It's this anonymous thing and this anonymous threat that is coming to us, right? This is nothing new. The caravans have been coming here for 15 years, right? But now it's politicized in a way, and it lands specifically when there's elections here and there's a new president in Mexico. Perfect storm to make it political. So it's an interesting point. How do you make collective memory? How do you provoke collective memory? Right? Most of them are trying to get these stories out. These families from Texas, there's a pushback. There's an enormous pushback for collective memory. This is this erasure, right? This never happened. No, and the Texas talk bad about the Texas Rangers in Texas. No, that's not going to happen. So there's a pushback from all sources, but they are really fighting, right? California, New Mexico, Arizona, Texas, there were lynching and hangings by the thousands, but nobody knows about it, right? Where is that collective memory, right? A couple academics are trying to do stuff, a couple artists are trying to make some noise. Little by little, that we're really trying to bring those stories and try to build on that notion of collective memory. But it's hard. It's very hard. History is funky. Yeah. So it's up to us. It's up to us to also contribute to that.
Kind of as a secondary question, I guess, like for those World War II veterans that you were trying to find an interview in the very beginning of your presentation, would you say that they've kind of given up on that idea of being able to create a dialogue and to create that idea of historical memory because they were so hard to find, they were so hard to get in contact with, and they're just like not talking? Like it seems like they had a good experience with you after the fact, but because they were so hard to find in the first place.
You're talking about the ones in Mexico?
The veterans, I think they were in New York.
Yeah, the first one were in Mexico.
St. Paul, just kidding. No, St. Paul.
Well, there's two parts. The first one, the first segment is in Mexico, Mexico City. And when I was growing up in Mexico, I have one little paragraph of the Escuadrón 201, Squadron 201. One little paragraph on all the historical texts that were grinded on me when I was a kid. One paragraph, right? And now probably there are only two or three of them alive. the majority of the people that I talk about that project is like, oh yeah, those guys that went on vacation. Like, no, they actually, some of them died there. All of them came back with PTSD, right? There's this unbalanced thing. Also of the veterans here, the dominant community is like, Mexican went and fought for the US in World War II. As a matter of fact, any and all of the wars that the US has been involved has had Mexicans. Talking about World War I, the Secession War, right? Civil War, World War II, you name it. All of them has had some Latinos involved with it. But it's like, that doesn't make some much sense, right? But then when they see a face, when they see a name, when they see a last name, it's like, ha, Mr. Aguirre. Yeah, yeah, of course. So that's part of the photography labor that I'm trying to do. That these people are not anonymous, they're not grouped. The immigrants, the veterans, right, is these people that have names and have a history and have something to say and have super interesting stories about their lives. Yes?
I'm trying to wrap my mind around the idea that, okay, you have these Mexican Americans who go, serve in the war, come back, and then as you say, nothing has changed, they're still alienated. And yet, by the way, like through your pictures and the way you talk about it, they still have so much pride for serving for this country, for being a citizen in this country. How can you explain, maybe from hearing more of their stories, how they have grown to have pride in this country rather than grown resentment?
Well, yeah. I'm not sure if I can talk for them, but I can tell you that there's some kind of brotherhood thing happening in the armed forces, that they are highly dependent on each other. There's an identity, a deep identity on being not only Mexican American, but also being from the Air Force, from the Marines, from you name it, right? So that keeps them together. Because the interesting part is not the romantic aspect of war, is how they go about coping with stuff. How they go about, yeah, I'm not being clear because I don't want to speak for them. It's tricky. But I can tell you that a good 97, 98% of them are completely anti-war. And that was like shocking for me, right? Not me not being, not having a military background. They know, right? They know industrial interest, they know economical interest, they know politics, you name it. These people are sharp. Like, yeah, we know why we're going to war, but then there's another level of family, if you might call it like that, that you won't leave them behind. So there's also that reason, for that reason, that people do 3 tours. Because, yeah, I know my boys are over there, right? I cannot be here, right, going to the supermarket and going about my life. I have to go back to protect that. That's a stronger bond more than the nationalistic aspect of the whole thing. And again, I'm being careful because, I mean, they will have a way better explanation than I.
We have time for a couple more questions.
How do you say communication with them, or do you still say communication with them?
With some of them, with some of them, yes. Little, I mean, because they have their network, and they operate in their own right. When one of them passes, I'm talking about the military. When one of them passes, I don't know until way later. But with the other groups, the families have asked me to keep in touch. They want to know where I've shown their images, what's going to happen to them, and actually, the next trip I'm going to try to actually go to the town where they were from, this Portraiture town, and it is, I think, 45 minutes from the nearest highway. So I have to rent a 4x5, and it's private property now. So I'm explaining all this to them, and they are like, I want to go. And so maybe I'm going to do a whole caravan that goes right all the way to that. And there's nothing there because they torched the place down, and there's really nothing. So I want to go there, and they want to keep in touch with me to see if we can go. And they want to connect me with other families, other descendants. As for the deported veterans, they want their story to get out, and they are connecting me with the veterans, the deported veterans in Tijuana. So that's another trip that I have to make, knock on the door and getting more stories. And I usually, if I have an exhibition or anything, I just give them the information. This is where your story has been, and this is how it was received. But an enormous percentage of people, I don't. Because there are really thousands and thousands of, these are just two projects. Usually I have 6 of them balancing them out. It's hard to keep track of all the people. What I usually try to give back, I give them back images, right, and I try to keep them updated. Because this is about them, it's not about me. Yes?
So having spent quite a bit of time at the border, obviously there's a lot of kind of reporting on that now, and you touched on how one of the big differerences is that, like, kind of in mass media reporting, the individuals don't have names. I was wondering if there's more of kind of like a disconnect or a discrepancy between like what we see reported and what the reality is at the southern border.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. This is an enormous piece of land that we share culture, food, languages. Everybody speaks English and Spanish. History, right? Everybody was affected by the Mexican Revolution and by so many things. So it is quite different of what you hear every day. Is different in so many levels. And that's one of the reasons that I want to go there and photograph. It's not this heroic thing that I'm going to go there and uncover stuff. No, it's one of the main reasons for me to go and photograph is to try to understand. Land there, talk to people, because we all have an opinion on border issues. Even though, we're 5 hours away from that border, but we're 1,000 miles from that other one. But we have an opinion because it's highly politicized. Yes, it is quite different, and I like to be there talking to people and seeing, going through that experience. An enormous amount of people cross back and forward daily, mostly in Tijuana, San Diego, and Juarez, El Paso. So they have another perspective of what that is. They have a very unique perspective. So to go and find out what is that, I think is interesting. Mostly we hear about crazy violence and and cartels and you know, well, now we hear about all the danger, the caravan is coming, right? But also to know that some of those problems are not Central American or Mexican. They are binational, trinational, multinational, right? When the president of the United States is saying MS-13, right? They're coming on those caravans. When those people are fleeing that violence, and knowing a little bit about the history of how those groups and communities started because of a conflict that the United States started, right? The United States and the CIA was present with coups and this and that in Central America, in Honduras, in El Salvador, in Guatemala, right? When that violence breaks, people migrate here. When people migrate not only to LA, but to pretty much every corner of the nation, right? There are not enough resources to have those kids educated and taken care of, right? So if you have a family that mom and dad work from 5 in the morning to 11 at night, the kid is going to find another family, right? Some of them that they can relate, right? That evolves into being something violent because of the lack of resources that we're pouring into those communities. And when they're misbehaving, we grab them and deposit them back in their original countries where they don't have a record. So they keep doing what they do. Those people fleeing that violence, no, we don't want them, right? Like, no, fix your own shit, right? Something that all of we created. So yeah, I went another way, but yeah, to your point, it is very different when you are there, when you're talking to people, and where you're hearing from them what is the situation.
Thank you.